The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We have about 30-something attendees registered and only about 11 online right now. So we're going to wait a couple more minutes to allow everyone to join, and we'll get started. All right, we have about 13 attendees on the call. I think we'll get started. I'm going to introduce our panelists today, but first, let me just walk everyone through how the Q&A session is going to work today. On your dashboard, you should have a panel for submitting questions where you can type in your questions, and I'll read them out to the panelists. If you're interested in reading out your question yourself with audio, please click the little hand icon, and I can unmute you, and you can ask your question to the panelists. This should be easier to use on this webinar because I think we'll have fewer attendees. So my name is Vicente Partida. I'm the comms director at the SCA. On the panel today, we've got Paul Stack, president of the SCA. We've got Heather Perry, vice president of the SCA. Rick Reinhardt, executive director. And Cindy Ludvigsen, the WCE managing director. So we're going to get started with some introductory remarks from Rick.
Thanks, Vicente, and thank you to everybody who's participating, either as an attendee or as a panelist. For some of you, I imagine it's quite early in the morning, and thank you for making the time. Our objective today really is to be available to answer questions that any of you may have to the best of our ability, and we welcome the opportunity to add any clarifying information we can. I would probably best serve to just take a quick or brief rundown on some of the background of how we arrived at this moment in time, and I'll run through that very quickly, and then again, happy to take any clarifying questions on that. As many of you may know, in 2010, the SCAA and the SCAE elected to take their mutual interest in WBC and extend it into a new company called World Coffee Events through mutual ownership and the desire to use coffee competitions, the barista competition, as well as the full slate of competitions that were available to spread the message of specialty coffee around the world. So the goal of WCE was to work together with the two organizations in order to take competitions to a higher level of professionalism and to give them the visibility that would enable us to utilize them effectively as a platform for demonstrating what specialty coffee excellence could be and how it could impact all the participants in both competitions and in our value chain. Traditionally, the organization has given the first rights to the World Barista Championship to the parent companies, and in general, that competition has been held either at the World of Coffee Show in Europe or at the SCA Expo in the US. Although we recognized early on that it was an excellent vehicle for driving the interest arenas where there were budding or nascent specialty coffee communities, or where there's a fully developed specialty coffee community that would benefit from having a competition there. So in 2011, actually I guess for the first time in 2007, we took the WBC to Tokyo, and then in 2011 to Bogota. And over the years, we've been able to not only take out the World Barista Championship, but many of the other competitions that have been in that suite of products that WC has managed. And we've, in general, tried to utilize the competitions to, as I said, to further the message and mission of specialty coffee, and to bring something unique to specialty coffee communities around the world. This year, this coming year, 2018, was a year in which we had an opportunity at World Coffee Events to release a number of the competitions into the wild, if you will, to go to places where they might further that mission and message of specialty coffee. So in 2017, World Coffee Events issued an RFP asking if anybody wanted to bid on hosting those competitions, and received 2 valid tenders from 2 cities, from Belo Horizonte, Brazil, and from Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. The World Coffee Events Advisory Board has long had a process for evaluating those kinds of tenders, and went through that process. And it's worth noting that process really has been focused on sort of the pragmatic aspects of identifying a partner host for these competitions. So is the partner, do they have the production capability to pull off a world championship? Do they have a venue? Do they have support from the specialty coffee community there? Is the event going to be embedded in a show that's of interest to the specialty coffee community? And is there is it a place that has airlift, hotels, and again, some interest for the coffee community? And those have been the general vetting parameters, and these offers were assessed with those parameters in mind, as per the custom of World Coffee Events. Having decided that in both cases, both cities qualified as host cities under those parameters for events that they had tendered against, World Coffee Event to a contract with in Dubai. The decision was made after review by the advisory board of World Coffee Events, and then by the board of directors of World Coffee Events. Clearly, we missed an opportunity to have a more robust vetting process and did not take into account some of the more critical issues that have arisen and been brought to our attention since that time. And at this juncture, the SCA board stepped in and elected to try and review the process that led us to this place. And from there, the board formed a review panel to examine the issues as thoroughly and critically as possible, and asked that review panel to forward its outputs to the board of SCA. That panel did its work, which included a fairly deep dive into the issues, as well
Sorry, Rick, let me interrupt you just really quickly. We can no longer hear you. And I'm not sure if you can hear me.
A key issue for us was the compulsory nature of a world competition. And
Rick, can you hear me?
The board, yes.
Sorry, you cut off there for about 30 seconds or so. It may help, I think you're having bandwidth issues. It may help if you turn off your webcam.
Happy to disappear.
Yeah, and just take, maybe rewind about 30 seconds there.
I'll put it I do have a face made for radio. I'm not sure where I stopped, but I'm going to assume I stopped at the review panel did its work and submitted the results of that work to the SCA board. The SCA board, it was rather quickly determined that one of the critical issues facing us was the compulsory nature of a world competition. That is, if you have been a competitor at the local or national level and have earned the right to compete at a world level, you are compelled to go to where that world championship is. And so the board asked the executive staff to engage with our partners in Dubai to see if there was a way to change or mitigate the compulsory nature of a world competition. The outcome of that work was a recommendation from the executive to the board for the deferred candidate policy, which the aim of that policy was, always has been, and continues to be, to ensure that when someone cannot attend a world championship but has earned the right to do so, and if they can't attend for any reason, political, legal, climate related, that they don't lose their place in line and that they can continue to be afforded the opportunity to compete. I will apologize now as clearly as possible for our rather stumbling attempts to voice what we had intended to do there. And clearly we've got lots of work to do in manifesting that policy in a way that ensures everybody's safety and privacy and accomplishes what our real goal was, which is to provide a guaranteed opportunity for those who qualified to compete on a world stage. And that work is ongoing. So that's what's led us to where we are. We are cognizant as staff and as the elected leadership of the SCA and WCE that it's critical for us to hear the voices of everybody in our community, be they majority communities or minoritized communities, and wherever they fall out in our organization. And so this town hall meeting and others that we've been invited to attend represent a part of our effort to capture the sentiment, the thoughts, the feelings in our community, and try to find the appropriate resolutions to accommodating the broadest possible spectrum of our membership and our communities, and pursue the objectives of the organization. And that was a lot of words for me, so I think I'll stop.
Okay, thank you very much, Rick. I believe you're going to be moved to an Ethernet connection shortly, and you'll join us again. So we'll open up to a Q&A now. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the questions panel. If you are interested in reading out your question to the panel using your audio, please also click the hand icon, and we can call on you that way. Let's see. Let's take a look. We have one question so far, so I'll go ahead and while we get some more questions in the questions panel, I'll go ahead and get started with this one. The question is, can you be more transparent in the vetting parameters, specifically to choosing Dubai over Brazil? Are there minutes from that meeting that will be made public? So I'll repeat that question. Can you be more transparent in the vetting parameters specifically to choosing Dubai over Brazil? And are there minutes from that meeting that will be made public? Cindy, would you like to take this question?
Sure. So as far as being transparent or more transparent, I think that we have presented information to express exactly, transparently what the vetting was. That it was based on criteria that was described in the RFPs, consideration specifically to the quality of the show, the proposals to support all of the logistical aspects of the show, the community engagement that we had. The stakeholders we work with were our sponsors, our judges, our competitors, activity that we've been doing in the region before. All of these were considerations that led us to the original decision. There was a proposal put forward by different countries or different organizers in different countries for different events. So we landed at different events in both Dubai and Brazil. There wasn't necessarily a choice of either or there. There was just a different mix of events in those two countries. Minutes of the meetings, they are, they record the resolutions. They are made available to the SCA. And I'm not actually sure about the process of minutes being available to the public, so I'll have to apologize for that. I want to just reflect on the idea that we've been fully transparent on the process, what led us to the decisions, and what we have in the contract is related to details around the support for the logistical provisions of the event, just like the RFP details. So there isn't anything beyond that is kept. I think there's just full transparency on that process.
Cindy, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Brazil and Dubai were the only two bidders, and neither one could take all of the competitions, correct? That's where it wasn't the either or. Right. Brazil didn't have the space for all of the competitions.
That's true, right? Right. The hosts make a choice on what amount of space they can provide and which competitions they'd be willing to consider. And so we had a scenario where we had two host proposals, and we had the mix of the 6 different competitions to consider.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Heather, as well. We've got another question here. What are your decision parameters for moving this event to a safe and neutral location? How can we meet those so we can persuade you to pull this from Dubai? Paul, would you like to take this question? And I'll repeat that. I'll repeat the question.
Sure.
What are your decision parameters for moving this event to a safe and neutral location? And how can we meet those so we can persuade you to pull this from Dubai?
So the parameters were outlined. They're on the website, I believe, as well, Cindy, in terms of your criteria for selection. And so the decision parameters were were clear in terms of, you know, the things that were outlined in terms of community, in terms of being able to host and being able to help with logistics, and that was all there. What wasn't there was an exploration of climate. This was the same processes we've used over the last 8 or 10 years, and ultimately, what has come out of this this episode of the last number of months is a clarity that climate needs to be included in our structures going forward. The current board resolution is an attempt to maintain the mission, which is to try and grow specialty coffee globally, and it's come and clashed up against some of the values, particularly the values which have been highlighted in terms of inclusiveness, whereas inclusiveness has been balanced on both sides. So this is the difficulty that the board had. So that's what led to the request from the board for the senior staff to try and put back to the board a resolution whereby we would be able to honor our mission in terms of growing specialty coffee globally, where those communities are thriving, and UAE and Dubai is one of those, but also to look at what had been unearthed, and the history of both heritage associations being in the SCAA and SCAE have both been active in the UAE for many, many years, and actually the World IBRIC Championship was successfully held there. What we realized was that in all of those events, the big issue here is obviously where people are compelled to turn up to leverage their national championship winning status. So that's where we asked the staff to go back and try and find a solution to that. That's where the deferred candidacy policy came from. In terms of the intent, as written in the statement on November 9th, we are putting together a membership and staff team to review all site selection processes, and there will be no further announcement of any location without that site selection process being reviewed, peer reviewed with members, and approved by the board before we go to future locations.
Thank you, Paul. We've got another question here. Robert Reuter asks, have you disclosed the contracts that are in place with the facilities in Dubai so the membership can see the existing financial and contractual commitments, as well as the potential opportunities to retract said commitments? Either way, what would be the cost to retract existing commitments? P.S. I have requested copies of the RFPs for the past few years and have not received them. Rick, do you wanna take this question?
Sure. If you requested copies of the RFP, for starters, I'd be happy to share that with you, and Cindy's the right person to do that. But the RFP is sort of states the parameters under which we would ask for bids. In terms of the contracts themselves, as is typical for these kinds of contracts, they have confidentiality clauses that would prohibit us from blanket publishing them. To the degree that we can be transparent around them, happy to answer specific questions. It's probably worthwhile to describe the nature of this tender process and what our expectations are. Keeping in mind that our goal with taking these competitions out on a more global basis over the last 10 years or so has always been to try and further the mission and the voice of the SCA and SCAE to drive specialty coffee out into the world. As a result, the typical sort of arrangement is really trying to find someone who can provide us with the logistical support. That is, they've got a venue, space, and the capacity to help build a stage and help with AV and these kinds of very logistic focused issues to host the competition. Varying offers over the years have included varying degrees of support, which range from those purely logistic issues to more sort of still mundane, but additionally advantageous issues for us. For example, providing hotel rooms for judges or for staff, or providing transportation assistance or things of this nature. The thing that has not been the case in these contracts, and is still not the case, is that these contracts have not been aimed at cash payments that could be used for any purpose other than the competitions themselves. So, in general, these contracts have been in-kind contracts. Very occasionally, we get a small bit of cash money that gets committed to marketing or to other purposes for helping to make the competitions better where they are. But you should know that in no case are these contracts that are enriching to WCE or to either the parent companies or to the single parent company today. They're really focused on, in their entirety, on providing that kind of logistical and venue support that allows us to do a world-class competition.
Thank you, Rick. And Robert Reuter writes, thanks, Rick. We've got a follow-up question from Reb Elkins. So the previous question was, what are your decision parameters for moving this event to a safe and neutral location? How can we meet those so we can persuade you to pull this from Dubai? Reb's follow-up question is, this doesn't address the question at all. Those were the parameters then. We want you to move now. How can we help you make the change now for this event? Heather, would you like to take this question?
You know, I think when we talk about what does it look like moving forward in the site selection, we don't have all of that criteria done. We know that it has to be more inclusive. I think we also know that it has to combine the things that we've left out of this, and so that will be that site selection process is yet to be written, and it will be peer review, as Paul mentioned, and that's where we are right now today. Don't know that. That's kind of where I can speak of it for right now. Is we're looking forward to saying, how do we not make this mistake again? How do we make sure that we pick site selections that are inclusive and that do not only support our mission but also support our values? And so the new site selection process is going to make sure to include all of that. And as Paul said, it will be peer reviewed by the membership and also by the board.
Thank you, Heather. We've got another question here from Joanna. I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name. Sorry about that, Joanna. What have the conversations been around inclusivity with the partners in Dubai? Do they understand people are unable to attend because of local laws? How do you plan to ensure the safety of the competitors who do attend in Dubai, who do visit Dubai? And how are you working with deferred candidates to ensure they are able to compete in the future events? So I'll repeat the question. What have the conversations been around inclusivity with the partners in Dubai? Do they understand people are unable to attend because of local laws? How do you plan to ensure the safety of competitors who do attend? And how are you working with deferred candidates to ensure they are able to compete in future events? I'll open this one up to the panel. Who would like to answer this question?
I don't mind starting with some of the answers when it comes to working with host partners. We do often get into discussions about how to make that general experience more of a sense of community. And we engage in those conversations regularly. Every time we go to different host locations, in this case, we can have that conversation about how to make participants feel like they are in a safe environment when we're there together. There's lots of different possible ways we could look at that. I want to be careful to recognize that part of the reason the selection criteria that we're talking about for the new criteria that needs to be convened is to explore an understanding of what laws actually are, and as well as what other guidelines that may be driven to create that new criteria. When we talk about inclusion, we've wanted to look at inclusive to a lot of voices. And so I'll come back to Dubai in particular in a bit, and working with our host partners, we've maintained this position that we care about all of our members and the experience that they're going to have, and we would want to work with them on how to make that a positive experience. I think there was a second part to the question, Vicente, if you could help me repeat that again.
Yes. So what have the conversations been around inclusivity with partners? Do they understand people are unable to attend because of local laws? How do you plan to ensure the safety of competitors who do attend? And how are you working with deferred candidates to ensure they are able to compete in future?
That's it. Thank you. The deferred candidates as far as competing in the future. So the idea of the deferred candidacy policy is to save the spot and allow for participation in future events. It would put us in the position of recognizing change in this sense that it isn't about recognizing just one country at a time, or one representative from a country at a time in future events, and then considering the logistical changes that may need to happen to allow for a mix of like a different quantity of participants each year at an event. And those are logistical challenges where our team is prepared to take on. We also know that policy needs to be developed in a way where we have the ability to track folks who want to have their opportunity to compete in the world saved for the next opportunity, and just that amount of data so that we can make sure that their position is saved for them.
Thank you, Cindy. Okay, we've got another question here from Timothy Grayson. You talk about promoting specialty coffee on the world stage as a motivating factor for taking these events to other countries. Are there any direct positive results that have come from other countries hosting these world events over the past 10 years? So,
yeah, if you don't mind, I'd love to take that, because sure. I feel like I've been on the front lines of that for many years. And yes, absolutely. In all of the places that we've gone where we've had events hosted in different countries, there is a very obvious result to the impact. The experience in itself provides a particular kind of sense of achievement and accomplishment and community for all the participants that take place in the actual event. But the footprint or the imprint that we leave on all of the others that live in the community, that watched the event, is generally a recognition to this world, this idea. Sometimes we're teased a little bit about wow, but it's just coffee, and there's this amazing stage, and people taking it very seriously and recognizing there is a lot of skill, a lot of craft, and a lot of pride in what they do out there. I go back to a few most notable cases, especially when we've been to, I think, locations that were more unique, like Colombia, for example. One comment that came from going to Bogota, Colombia one year with the WBC was that in the way that they would relate to the history of coffee, they now have this benchmark of before WBC and after WBC, because they were identified as a producing country, and after WBC it left an imprint, and also being a consuming country as well. And in addition to that, so much inspiration to folks who have only had experience in their lives from a producing perspective, to see what it meant to a lot of consumers from around the world coming to show them how they carried through the preparation of coffee. And it is everywhere we've gotten, every single country we've been to. It's very obvious to see this this strong emotional impact, and then to also recognize the way that the companies engage, that media maybe talk about stories after the fact, all are increased because of the initial engagement in that country. So I do think there is significant impact to bringing these events around the world.
Thank you, Cindy. We're just going to share some details here to everyone on the call. This is a link to the RFP, WC RFP details that you can find on the WC website. Cindy, Timothy says, that's rad. Thank you. Also, a thank you from Joanna for Heather. Any other questions? We don't have any other questions here on the question panel. So if anyone has any more, please feel free to type them in. We've got a hand up from Vanessa Facenda. Let me unmute you. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
I just want to know, per the deferred candidate policy as it was issued on the SCA website, candidates must apply to be deferred. So it makes it sound like they may not be approved. So what are the criteria that candidates must meet in order to be approved?
Rick, you want to answer that?
Yeah, let me please. Let me say this about the policy. So the policy as it stands today is really conceptual and utterly conceptual. This was a recommendation from the staff at SCA to the board about a way to mitigate the compulsory nature of the competition. We have not taken that concept much past its concept stage, and certainly we have been terrible at communicating both the structure and intent of that concept. We will change that. We've got a structure in place to build, as identified, a committee that will look at the process of the deferred candidate policy from as many angles as possible, with as many eyes on it as possible, to try to understand all the implications of how such a policy is structured, and to keep in mind at every step that the actual intent of that policy is to provide opportunity, not to limit opportunity. And it's to provide opportunity for those candidates who have qualified to participate at the world level to maintain that qualification, irrespective of cultural, political, legal issues that they may face. So one way or another, if someone is prohibited from competing for reasons, for legal reasons or for political reasons or for reasons of climate, identity, whatever those reasons may be, that they can have a reasonable expectation to be able to compete in the future and to preserve their place in line. Equally importantly is our respect for everybody's right to privacy, and there's exactly zero desire to delve into those reasons in any significant way. And we haven't written the policy as such, but clear in our minds as we move forward with that process, with lots of input from our communities, is that protecting an individual's rights, both to privacy and to compete, are paramount. And so we'll have that firmly in mind. At the moment, there are no limitations because there are no fixed parameters to this.
I'd like to add just something from a technical perspective to being part of the organizing team of operators to event planning. Some of that application process is merely about being able to have the chance to log that there is a process, there's a name, there's a person who wants their spot saved. And so it isn't just, you know, a scenario where we get through an event and then somebody comes back afterwards and says, yeah, I know I didn't talk to you, but I meant to do that. That there's a process in which we want to make sure that we get the communication so that we can plan for it. The other thing is that the policy is designed as a way to have the opportunity for the champion of each country to have their spot saved, and it is also possible that there's confusion out there that people think this is a way to register for a position in a national event or in any other event, and so having a process of application is necessary just to make sure we are communicating to people to understand this is for champions who have the ability to go to the world events, and not as a means for any other type of activity or event. So I do think there's a logistical need as well to just have a process of application, so that we make sure that the person who's asking for it and ourselves are clear on what it means, and that we have it recorded.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Rick. We have a follow-up question, and thank you, Vanessa, for your question. We have a follow-up question here about the benefits to host countries of hosting World Championship events. Rev Elkins asks, do you have data or metrics on that impact, on the impact of World Championship events on host countries? Inspiration is nice, but do these events meet measurable goals? Without that, does it make sense to move this event around as opposed to choosing a safe and neutral location?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at this to say I don't think we have profound and detailed data. We have lots and lots and lots of anecdotal evidence, and certainly we can look at some comparative data. For example, you can look at the rate of internal consumption in the specialty segment in Colombia pre and post WBC, but that would be that data could be correlated. I'm not certain that we could demonstrate that it was causal. These things obviously are challenging in any sense to look at the relative causation effect of an event like this. Similarly, we would be hard pressed to say that we have substantial data that suggests that the events themselves in their existence have driven specialty coffee consumption, but we can certainly make that correlation, and we elect to look at that correlation as being at least partially causal. So that's a bit of a no, we don't have great data, but we do have some data answer. I'd also further suggest that one of the things that became abundantly clear to us in this process, and I'm not certain was fully clear to us prior to that, is that there are any number of impediments to participation that national champions face as they try to move to the world level. And those impediments range from the climate-related ones or culturally related ones that are particularly difficult for us to account for, to legal and political ones that while they have a different basis and are not equivalent, have a similar outcome. Competitors have in the past been prohibited from competing at the international level because of these kinds of legal constraints. Notably, the Mexican champion in 2015 was unable to compete at the World Barista Championship in Seattle that same year because she couldn't acquire a visa for entry into the country. Again, not an equivalency, but the outcome was the same in the sense that that competitor was prohibited from competing. Now we were trying to design a process that would ensure that that didn't repeat itself. What we did acknowledge in our exploration of this is that in almost every case, in almost every country, somebody somewhere will run into some sort of barrier that keeps them from competing. So our goal was to try to find as universal an answer as we can, and to acknowledge that there is likely no single place that could be considered absolutely safe and absolutely sure and absolutely compliant in the sense that every potential champion could be admitted safely, securely, and legally to compete at the international level. So we've tried very hard to prepare ourselves to make a better vetting process that eliminates the maximum number of those possible impediments, but we recognize simultaneously that we have to have a mechanism for those impediments as they occur.
Thank you, Rick. We've got another question here from Patrick Burns. If a champion uses the deferment, then there is a public outing in one way, shape, or form. Do you feel that would cause coffee professionals from foregoing competing? I'll repeat that. If a champion uses a deferment, then there is a public outing in one way, shape, or form. Do you feel that would cause coffee professionals from foregoing competing? Cindy, I think this is a question that you could answer, specifically about maybe the privacy issues around deferred candidacies.
Mm-hmm. Well, with the DC policy being conceptually designed to eliminate that barrier of entry, and that the causality to why a candidate might refer to take a deferment is for a number of reasons. There is not necessarily a outing of sorts, just the ability to take a deferment. Whether or not it may change an individual's decision as to whether or not they want to compete, it's up to the individual. We have in the past had scenarios where we didn't know the locations where the world would take place before competition, and it is always possible that that those locations could impact a decision for a competitor as to why they want to compete to begin with. But I found most of the time the compelling reasons to compete is not about where the world location was staged. It's just that if the world location is staged in a place now that is inaccessible to you, that your opportunity to compete in a world level will not be. It'll be saved. So there is no requirement, as Rick alluded to earlier, that is defined as to need to declare any specific private information. Just the ability to raise your hand and say, there's a reason I would like to have a deferment and have my spot saved for the future.
One of the things that I just want to add on from the board perspective is the deferred candidacy. The board does not look at as a license to take the competitions wherever we want now. We are not looking at it as, hey, we've got this policy, so if you're not happy with it, that's okay. You can take the deferred candidacy. We know we need to do better with site selection. And so one thing that I don't want to lose sight of is there will be a new site selection process, so that you don't have these cases of people feeling that need to. Privacy is our utmost importance, and inclusivity and people feeling comfortable to the place that they go to. So I just want to kind of recall that as well as from a board perspective, from a strategy, from an executive level as well. Moving forward, we know we have to find sites that are inclusive and that do support both our mission and our values.
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Heather. We have a question here. Will there be a transcript or recording of this conversation posted? Yes, just like the previous webinar, the video and the recording of this will be available on the SCA News website. That's scanews.coffee. And we'll make sure to post it there right after this call. We have a follow-up question from Joanna. She says, I am still feeling unclear why the location cannot change for this event. What are the main reasons why the location cannot be changed at this point in time? I'll open that one up to the panel.
I'll take a first run at it and then cede the floor to Paul. But I just say that we as an organization, as two organizations, frankly, as World Coffee Events and as the sort of supervising organization of World Coffee Events that is SCA, these contracts were entered into in good faith, the way that one does. We issued an RFP, there was a tender response, the contracts were negotiated, and we moved forward with them. So to one degree, the current situation is much impacted by our commitment as an entity to our contractual obligations. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it, and I think Paul would probably be better positioned to expound on this, is that we are extraordinarily cognizant of our mission, and our mission is to build coffee communities throughout the world and to foster those coffee communities where they are developing and would benefit from nurturing. And certainly we recognize that not every coffee community that's nascent or developing has the luxury of being in a completely open and completely transparent society or culture. We want to continue to foster those communities. We want to continue to pursue our mission, and we want to keep that as broadly geographic as we can. Those are the two overarching factors that are influencing our current position, and I'd leave Paul to add to that.
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, I mean, ultimately you've covered both points, but really it is about where we have been active in the world and where we have successfully grown specialty coffee as a community and as a global community now, acting locally in different regions as those communities grow and supporting those. And what has been highlighted here, as articulated by Rick, is that there has been a continuous stream of locations whereby attendance is challenged. And we recognize we've got to deal with that in terms of the areas where people are compelled to go through winning. And that's the nature of the championship issue. Because if we're running education, running seminars, running conferences, or any of those things, attendance is voluntary. Whereas with competition, attendance is compulsory. And it's the compulsory nature, and it's not just the Dubai issue. We're not trying to conflate one issue with another, but the WCE, and now by extension parent SCA, has had this issue for 10 years and never really properly dealt with it, which is what we're trying to achieve.
Thank you, Paul and Rick. I don't have any more questions here on the questions panel. Just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, we have about 7 minutes left. If anyone has any more questions, we've got Joanna here says thank you, Rick and Paul. We've got hand up from Vanessa. 1 second. Vanessa, there you go.
You hear me? The UAE there have been coffee-related events in the UAE for years, from SCA taught classes to trade shows like Gulf Food. Why do you think these championships in particular have created such an uproar?
I'll try. Well, off you go, Rick. Do you want me to go? To be honest, we don't. There's no clear reason as to why this has caused an uproar. As I've mentioned already, we've successfully ran the IBRIC World Championship, which had national champions from around the world competing, and we've had lots of SCAA and SCAE events for years in the UAE without incident or complaint. So why this issue has blown up now, I honestly don't know. I can only suspect is that, I don't know, someone may have had an issue there. I actually don't know the big noise, I suppose, that made the community listen was Sprudge's article. Now, was that on the back of someone else raising that? I don't know. So I'm afraid I don't know the origins of as to why this issue is highlighted now. I personally have to say I don't think it's a bad thing it's highlighted. We will, as a result of this, be able to reflect upon our site selection, be able to look at the difficulties competitors have had, and hopefully make things better. But in short, I don't have a real answer as to why now and not during, for example, the last IBRIC Championship. Rick.
Yeah, I'd just add to that we have been, I think, reasonably called out for not hearing the voices of all of our community members. And that's a fair criticism of us. We certainly have not actively had listening posts into all of our communities as effectively as we'd like to. And so this has given us an opportunity to explore that and to recommit to that kind of active listening. I don't think that in any way having had the experience in Dubai and not ever having any problems there is an excuse, but it is in fact one of the reasons that we found ourselves sort of not taking these issues into account prior to now. We've had lots of experience there, and it's in general been all positive. And to be perfectly fair, we haven't had any members of our community express concerns until now. That doesn't change the validity of those concerns. Those concerns are valid concerns, and those communities who express those concerns have the right to express those concerns, and we have the obligation to hear them and to try and resolve them. So we're here now, and we'll keep working on this because of that, because we recognize the rights of every part of our community, and we recognize our obligations as the volunteer and paid leadership in the organization.
Thank you very much. We have time for one more question. We have a question here. For the Dubai event, is there any sort of plan for safety for the non-competing members of SCA and WCE staff, volunteers, judges, specifically asking about members of the LGBTQ community?
I can say this much, that as we've gone to different geographies where there are different cultural norms, there are different legal structures, there are different perceived or real degrees of safety for across the broad spectrum of possible participations, we have tried to provide guidance. And I will say that Dubai has a guide to understanding the cultural and legal norms in the Emirates. There are some very specific recommendations in terms of public demeanor, and I'm not sure that addresses every possible scenario here, but it is broadly applicable to everybody who visits Dubai. And we will be able to provide that kind of guidance, much as we have in the past in other locations that might have been unfamiliar to many of our members. We'll continue to work on additional ways to support not only competitors, but coaches and team members and judges and volunteers and staff, so that we do the best we can so that everybody's well informed on how to best have a positive experience there.
Thank you, Rick. All right, I think we've reached the end of the hour here. Before we go, I'd like to open it up to the panel. Any final words for the audience on the call today?
Just to thank people for taking the time and to invest their time and energy into this issue. And I suppose just to reiterate what our timings are, which is to try and get an update to the community before the end of this calendar year on moving forward both the new site selection process and putting some detail on the deferred candidacy policy. We won't have them complete by calendar year, just to be clear on that, but we will be looking to have an update so that we've got a schedule that we can inform members on what we're trying to achieve and by when. And thank you to all.
Thank you, Paul. And thanks to everyone on the call today. As mentioned earlier, we will have the recording of this video on SCA News. You can find the latest announcements on that on the DC policy at scanews.coffee/DC policy. And that's where you can also find a link to the FAQ that's on the WCE website. Thanks very much to Paul Stack, President of the SCA, Heather Perry, Vice President of the SCA, Rick Reinhardt, Executive Director of the SCA, and Cindy Ludvigsen, WCE Managing Director. Thanks, everybody, and have a good day and a good evening. Bye-bye.